what's going to happen next? Do you feel there will be greater freedom of expression?
Well, I think so, because I think the most significant thing that has happened in these last few weeks, not only in Libya, obviously, but also in Tunisia and in Egypt, hasn't been what people have focused on, which is the toppling of, long-standing, incredibly violent, oppressive dictatorships, although that's, of course, an incredibly significant event. I think what has been more significant is that I get the sense that people in Tunisia and in Egypt and now in Libya are rediscovering what it means to be a people. They're rediscovering their national identity, the sense of themselves, certain kind of, regaining of a sort of pride and, sense of what it means to live in a metropolis. And so I think inevitably that's going to make cultural life more vibrant and more rich.
Let me bring in Adaf Soef and ask, when you were in Egypt recently and you were there taking part in the protest in Tahrir Square against the Egyptian President Mubarak's regime, what sense did you get of what people wanted? I mean, of course, people are very concerned about the economic disparity in a place like Egypt, but how high on the list of priorities was, for example, the freedom of expression and the chance to change some cultural norms?
Well, I agree completely with what Hisham has just said. What I saw happening was exactly a people rediscovering themselves, rediscovering what it meant to be Egyptian and celebrating that. And over the 3 weeks, Tahrir Square very, very quickly became the civic space that we all long for and that we all feel that we deserve. And this was manifested in all sorts of ways, including that it was this great burst of creative energy, which showed itself in people creating art. There was street art, there were stand-up comics, there were, of course, all the slogans and the placards that people were inventing and carrying around. There were the jokes, there were the songs, the chants. There was a huge burst of expression, which was creative, innovative, humorous, and that people were celebrating as it was happening. They were discovering what it was like
I wonder
to
then,
be able to speak.
Hadaf, I wonder if then that rich cultural heritage that Egypt had has not been crushed or destroyed over time. Then is it still, you still feel it's vibrant?
Well, you know what? For years, I and many others have been holding on to a position that looked impossibly romantic, which basically can be summarized as: we have developed an Egyptian character over 7,000 years. The fact that it has been so sort of rubbished for 40 years can't matter. It is there somewhere, and at some point we're going to shake off all this dust and debris and it will shine forth again. And this is what happened in this revolution. Now,
Ariel Dorfman, it's great to have you on the show as well. A pleasure and honor that you could join us, sir. And I wonder, it's not only in the Middle East that writers and intellectuals and artists have felt the heavy hand of oppression by authoritarian regimes. And I wonder, it's happened all over the world. How do you compare the situation that you're seeing in the turbulent countries of the Arab world right now with what you witnessed yourself in your home country, Chile, where, of course, you eventually had to flee into exile because of the Pinochet regime?
The first thing that you feel is this enormous joy to see that the Egyptians and the Tunisians and the Libyans are Chileans as well. And I think the extraordinary thing that you're hearing here is voice. There are many voices that were there, but they were suppressed. They weren't finding each other. Now they're able to echo. Now they're able to go forth. In my case, I lived 3 very different experiences. I lived a revolution with Salvador Allende for 3 years. I lived 17 years of oppression and persecution under the dictatorship. And then I lived what now the Egyptians and the Tunisians and others are starting to look at, which is the transition to democracy, which is the most complicated of all these, both for the people, for the politics, for the army, but especially for the writers and for the artists. So there are many different ways in which artists participate according to what the tasks of the revolution or the repression or the transition may be. But these are not always the same sort of thing that you do. In other words, I can't write Death in the Maiden when I'm with Allende's, because people aren't being tortured there, right? So I wrote it for the transition. So I think that one of the interesting things that we have to understand is that there is not one voice only coming out of this, only one way in which you react to this, but that writers especially and artists react in different ways and have different tasks, often simultaneously, during these periods of repression, of transition, of revolution.
And Ariel, I know that you know, writers and intellectuals, and it's that sort of element of society that's often preemptively targeted by authoritarian regimes when they come into power. They seem to go straight for them in the first instance. What do you think is the immediate threat?
Well, the immediate threat is that if you allow anybody to speak out, if you allow anybody, I mean, the one thing that art has, especially in countries such as Egypt, Libya, Chile, is that it's always transgressive. Even when it's a love poem, it's transgressive, because you're expressing truth. And these are regimes that are based upon lies. They're based upon hiding from each other and from the people the truth of what's happening. So because artists tend to, I think what artists always do and writers always do is, in some sense, in the joy of our own writing and the expression, we are calling into being the society of freedom and of communication, right. Some sort of a utopian society that will be in the future. So we are really very, very dangerous. We're dangerous as symbols. We're dangerous as expressive voices.
Hisham Attar, let me ask you, you had personal experience of living, you know, with the secret police and living under the regime of Muammar Gaddafi. Give us some idea of what you really experienced in terms of how repressive it was.
Well, you mean my family. Personal experience, or you mean
yourself
family experience?
Yourself and your
well,
family,
it was,
of course,
yeah, well, we left Libya in the late 70s when, I mean, if you were to choose, you know, one of the important years under the Gaddafi regime, it was 79, because many writers were imprisoned then. It was a great crackdown on civil society, books were burnt. We left that year and we went to Egypt, and it wasn't until 10 years later that my father was kidnapped. And during those 10 years, we were sort of sandwiched between two dictatorships, between the Egyptian and the Libyan. And so we had security guards supposed to be guarding us, but actually, as it turns out, they were sort of monitoring us, Egyptian security guards. And in the end, it was actually the Egyptian Secret Service that handed my father over to Libya. But I mean, this is a particular story. This is our particular story. I don't think it's as relevant right now, or as interesting right now as general life in Libya. I mean, there are people that went through much worse things than that.
Let me,
you know, summary execution and disappearances under Gaddafi were you know, a very common thing.
Let me bring in a caller we've got on the line from Virginia. Oliver, thanks for being with us. What would you like to ask?
Thank you, Riz. I have a couple questions. The first one is the substance of the word that activate these demonstrations or the repetition? Because from history, we learned that the German people went with Adolf Hitler, despite all the atrocities that he did, to the end, until the end. So that's my question: is the repetition or the substance? And the second question is, if these autocratic regimes in the Middle East and Northern Africa start collapsing one after another, is this going to affect the intelligence sharing between the Western intelligence agencies and their intelligence agencies? Is going to